first of all, I'm Lisa Poff. I'm project coordinator with the Indiana Deafblind Services Project. And welcome to today's Learning Media Assessment Workshop. Couple of logistics. First of all, I've turned off all microphones and all of your cameras. If you can just kind of keep those off, it'll make things move a little smoother doing this virtually.
Yeah.
Throughout the session, if you have comments or questions, if you'll post those in the chat box, I'll make sure that we keep track so that we don't lose any of them. And if there's a bunch, I may ask Alea to address it at the time if it's the same topic. Otherwise, I think we'll wait till the end and talk about what your questions were then. The chat box is available for everybody to view, so you'll see what's coming through. This session is also being live captioned. If you need captioning, you can click on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen to turn on closed captioning. If you want a certificate for this workshop, you must complete the evaluation, and you will have until August 27th at 5 o'clock to do that. The certificates will then be emailed to everyone the week of the 31st. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alea, to tell them about yourself and get going.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us. Oh, looks like somebody's in the, okay, you got it. I see the little pop-ups. I see you guys. And yeah, and if there are questions and, you know, they start kind of piling up, just let me know and we can address them as we go. That's fine too. You know, I'm real flexible, whatever works and kind of goes with the flow. So that's good. So I'm glad more people are joining us. This is great. So I hope everyone's doing okay and staying safe, you know, ramping up for the new school year. If you haven't started and if you've already started, you know, I hope it's going smoothly so far for you in this time of COVID. My name is Olaya Landavillard, and I am an adjunct professor for Indiana State University, which I'm so proud to be a part of. I've wanted to work for Indiana State for a long time, but so I have the opportunity now, so that's good. But I'm also the director of the American Printing House for the Blind Connect Center, which is the old AFB websites of Family Connect, Vision Aware, and Career Connect, and BroBug have all transferred over to American Printing House for the Blind, and they are part of the Connect Center. So I started there in May and you know, hit the ground running and have not stopped ever since. I have been in 4 meetings today, and now that I had to leave the last one to be here on time to make sure that's just it's a busy time for us. So I have my contact information at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. So if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, you're more than welcome to do that. And as Lisa said, she's going to have the recording of this webinar on the past website, so you'll be able to go back and listen to it again, watch it, and you know, go over some of the practice activities that we're gonna try to get through today. I always put a lot of stuff in my presentations and lots of things to do, so I'll try not to go way over time. And Lisa, I'm sure she'll let me know when I need to stop or start. Or I'm getting close to counting down to the end, so we'll get started. So learning media assessments for, and oh, by the way, the camera's here, but the second screen is over here where I'm sharing the PowerPoint. So you'll see me kind of going back and forth. So almost like a tennis match. So I hope I don't disorient anybody by doing that. But so just wanted to let you know, that's why I'm going back and forth. So in the title slide, I have, you know, learning media assessments for infants and toddlers with visual impairments and multiple disabilities, because as we know, the majority of the students who we work with have multiple disabilities, including the blindness or the visual impairment. But I also have reintroducing a hidden gem. There is a process for the LMA that was created a while back, actually, by Tanny Anthony. And we'll, as we go through this and we get to the forms, you'll see she gets all the credit for this. I didn't come up with this. This was just, like I said, reintroducing a hidden gem. I had the, the privilege of working with Deborah Hatton and Tanny Anthony, but Deborah Hatton helped create these training modules for UNC Chapel Hill. for early intervention for children with visual impairments. And one of them is about appropriate orientation and mobility services, and the other one is appropriate TVI services. And so before she passed away, this last year and a half ago, she sent me all of those materials that that were created for that particular project, because I was the investigator for a project here in Illinois, which is, I live in El Paso, Illinois. That's where I'm coming to you from. On training teachers of the visually impaired to become early intervention providers, which is a very unique thing, because as we know, there are not very many programs that actually cater to early intervention for teachers who are visually impaired. So we had a grant to do that, and that's where I learned about this gem that was created like almost 20 years ago now. But it's still very valuable, still very useful, and TSBVI actually has it on their outreach site. So you can always get to the entire curriculum that has all these different modules for early intervention. So, and I also have that link at the end in the resources area, so that after this presentation or any other ones that I give on early intervention, you can always go back to TSBVI and gain access to all those materials, because they're not sold anymore. You can't, they're not even on Amazon or eBay or anything. So we're really lucky that we have these and that we can share them. And again, I thank Deborah Hatton for, kind of leading the charge on this and putting all this together. Let me move down the line here. The modules were done, like I said, out of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. They have their Child Development Institute, and that's where it's from. And this is a session 4 out of all of the sessions in that particular curriculum. So the objectives of the developmentally appropriate learning media assessment, or DALMA, for young children with visual impairments and multiple disabilities, is we're going to learn about how to complete one of those types of assessments if you haven't done one before for little ones, and then how you can use those results to plan intervention. So when we're looking at a DALMA, we have to think outside the box and really shift the way we have done learning media assessments in the past, or learning media assessments for kids who are in early childhood, who are either higher functioning, because typically what we're doing in learning media assessments is we're trying to do tactual discrimination. We might use do a reading record using the Johns, all these different higher skilled type activities for learning media assessment. I don't know about you, but trying to do that with a 6-month-old may not be the best way to figure out what their learning preferences are as far as their learning modalities, whether they're auditory learners or tactile learners or visual learners, kinesthetic learners. So the DALMA really looks very heavily at the sensory preferences of our students who we're serving at the infant to toddler range. And so it just that in and of itself, right away, we have to just take off our normal school-aged, LMA hats and put on this early intervention birth to 3 hats, and how we would do an LMA with these types of kids. And I don't know how familiar everyone is with doing an FVA or FVE with infants, but I will talk just a little bit about them in this presentation, but because our focus is on the learning media assessment. But there's information on that TSBVI website that has the supplement to this particular session that deals with functional vision assessments for infants and toddlers. So just want to let you know about that. Then we'll also, part of the presentation, when we're done, we'll be able to identify and describe formal and informal tools and procedures that can be utilized to conduct and complete a DALMA. recognize the results of the clinical eye exam, FVA, and DALMA are the basis for developing a comprehensive intervention plan. So when you do an FVA, it should be automatic that you do an LMA. And that may be, you know, second nature to most people or to many of you. But when I came to Illinois, that was not the common practice. At least I had learned that was not the common practice. And so I wanted to be sure that that just became part. You do an FVA, you do an LMA, just like together. You know, they should always be attached to each other. And then the last objective is we'll be able to describe and summarize the results of the DALMA and a professional, family-friendly report and how they can be used to plan intervention. So you have to remember too, when you're doing a DALMA and when you're writing up these reports, these are more part of the IFSP that happens in early intervention. And you're also dealing with families who may be very new to the world of visual impairment. So being very cognizant of how we write our reports and the terminology that we use and how we break down information is really, really, really important for this early intervention time in a family's life. So we'll be taking a look at that. So functional vision assessment, we know this, it's the systematic observation assessment of visual functioning in different routines and activity settings. So when we're looking at early intervention years, everything goes back to the routines that happen in the natural environment. And that's where we get the information, not only for an FVA, but for an LMA for this age group of kiddos. The results, of course, are used in combination with other information to identify priorities for facilitating development, learning, and optimal use of vision. I think right now, especially, we have to be very, I don't want to say forceful, but we need to advocate really strongly that all of our kids still receive complete functional vision assessments and learning media assessments, whether it's from a distance, if your school district is only doing distance education, or whether you're on campus doing it. And the reason I say that is because one of the things that I have, being at APH, I get a lot of emails from all over the country with concerns or questions or comments about things that are happening out in the field. And I've heard that some states, some areas, some regions are recommending that TVIs use just the I report for eligibility for our students, which that is a dangerous practice. It goes against IDEA regulations, and I'm very much about equality and access for all of our kids. So my thing is, if our kids can't get assessed, then none of the kids can get assessed. And I guarantee you, parents of sighted children would be the first ones out there to be complaining about why their kids aren't being assessed and all these other things, or being left out of things. So and by just looking at an eye report, we can definitely miss a lot of the characteristics that our children display using their whatever vision they have, right? How they're using, or how their vision is functioning and helping them access their environment. And for early intervention, for our kids, using, or how their vision functions is different in the home than how their vision would function in a school setting. So we need to be able to still do those types of assessments, and we just have to get creative as to how we do that. So, and one more reason, I remember having a student looking at her eye report, and we thought this little girl was going to be totally blind. She was like 1200. And when she walked in our door at the assessment center, she walked in with no problem. Like, she wasn't using a cane. She was running up and down the hallways, and she was, doing fine motor skills with tiny, like putting pennies inside of a piggy bank. Like, that's not a kid with 20/1200 vision. So, we would have totally missed the mark on that as far as planning interventions for that student by just looking at the eye report. So we, especially this year, have to be really big advocates for our kids to make sure that they're getting assessed properly so that we can develop appropriate intervention plans, IEPs for them. So factors affecting the FVA, an FVA describes their visual responses, in familiar or unfamiliar settings, under varying levels of motivation and alertness, and in different environmental conditions. And so, again, looking at the factors that affect the FVA, you can say the very same thing for the factors that can affect an LMA. Again, because we're looking at kids in their natural settings, in their home environments. And so we're looking at, and definitely in early intervention, we're looking at them in very familiar environments. So I think we get a way better picture of how they're using their vision in their home, with the lighting in the home, if there's a playground near the home that they typically go to, you get a really good idea of how they use their vision in places that they're very familiar with, versus having them go to a testing center or to a school where they're not familiar, and their vision, the way they're using their vision is not so much just to access the environment. They're more like trying to check it out, like, what is this, what is that? And so are you testing how they use their vision, or are you testing how they get used to a new environment? and so, that can affect the results of any of our assessments, and we have to be cognizant of that. So when I talk about factors affecting the FVA, those are similar factors that could be affecting the LMA. The three purposes of the FVA: supplement the results of the eye exam, and then, of course, with the descriptions of the child's observable behaviors, because in an eye exam setting, in a clinical setting, doctors aren't going to go, do what we do and observe the kids for a little while and make notes of how they're doing certain things, opening drawers or closing drawers or turning, machines on and off, or toys on and off. They're just there, they do the exam, and you're out. And it's a very clinical setting. The lights are different from being at home and things like that. So, we need to make sure that we're looking at how they're using their vision, identifies their range of visual function, and their priorities and, strategies for intervention. So that's what we're looking at the most when we're doing our FVAs. And I think it's important right now to just mention this. As an early intervention provider and as an early intervention, instructor and trainer, and a family engagement specialist once, when I worked at the Deafblind Project here in Illinois as a family engagement specialist or coordinator. I have heard parents tell me that doctors tell them not to seek out early intervention services because we can't fix the child's vision. That's not what we do. And so I think, and I'm preaching to the choir here, and I think it's important that we, are trying to educate the community and the families who we work with to understand that, we're different from a doctor. Doctors are not educators. They're doctors, we're educators. And so we're not there to try to fix a child's vision. We're there to see how they can use their vision to help with their development and then access their educational environment when they get to school. So, which that is a very sad thing. We have some kids who never get early intervention because of stuff like that. So that's another reason why I think it's really important that we focus on and we make sure that we're advocating for vision assessments in general at the school level and early intervention for sure, because it does help us identify those strategies and those priorities that we need to help our kiddos continue to develop so that they're ready when they make that transition from early intervention to early childhood. The functional vision assessment rationale, even though two kids might have the same visual diagnosis, they totally see differently. They do not see the same. And that's why it's important for us, even though we, especially like right now with CVI, you might have 5 kids that have CVI, but your interventions are going to look different for each one of those kiddos because they all have different functional vision. And so that also is going to mean that they're all going to have a different learning media, a different mode of how they prefer to access their information, whether it's tactual, whether it's visual, whether it's, by moving and touching or auditory. So the FVA and the LMA really do tie in together. Okay, I'm going to skip over a couple of slides that I see are maybe repetitive, and I want to make sure we have time to do our practice exercises. So systematic process for FVA, and that this information goes directly into your LMA as well. Review medical records, receive input from caregivers, which for LMA at this stage from birth to 3 is probably one of the biggest portions of your LMA, is going to be that interview that you have to do, you should do, to get the most information you can about that child, because they're babies and they're going to change every 6 months. That's why for IFSP you usually meet every 6 months to go through the family plan and see what the families are, what their goals are for their child because of the changes that they might be going through. But really, they're not in a school setting where you can get observational notes or anecdotal notes from others in and around the school who deal with the child. When they're infants and toddlers, the people who know them best are going to be the family members, the caregivers in the home. So that's a very big portion of the LMA, and then of course it falls in with your FBA. So you can already see it's very hard to separate the two in any meaningful way, but eventually, because they do overlap. But the learning media assessment will in some ways build the case for why a student may be one type of learner over another, because you started doing this LMA from the time they were 6 months or 8 months, or whenever you got to work with the child in the home setting or in the natural setting. And building that case is really important, because if you have a student who is a Braille reader or even a dual media, some schools may advocate for that student to just use ebooks or e-learning or audio books, that kind of, not e-learning, audio books or ebooks, because it's cheaper. And so I don't know about you, but trying to do math or chemistry or any of that stuff by just listening to it can be pretty difficult. So we have to have enough quote unquote evidence that will guide administrators and help support us in our recommendations for our students as to why they need Braille. It's not a luxury. It's like other kids need print. Kids who need print would not be forced to only have ebooks or audiobooks. So our kids should be no different. So that's another reason why it's really important to make sure that we are doing these LMAs early on, getting this information from the caregivers to really give the LMA a lot of meat to show and prove to whoever is going to be working with the student next what's going to work best for the student, so that we can design these programs to really move our kids forward. Again, part of the process, make informal observations, assess the visual abilities, and write the report. The caregiver's role, Okay, the caregiver's role, in addition to your observations, obviously, we want them to observe the child when we're not present, when we're not around, because kids do act differently, right? When other people are there who are visiting. So that's why sometimes the parents will say, well, he does A, B, or C. And we're like, I've never seen him do that. Well, no, because you don't live with them. So you're not going to see all the things that the child does. Sometimes I've worked with families who show me videos of their kids and what they were doing, to show me like, yeah, you weren't here, but look, I told you, this is what they're doing. And so a big part of what their role is to do that observation when you're not around. And then of course they would complete the checklist that can provide us with information about the best times of day to conduct the FVA. Some of our kids are on medications that make them very drowsy, sleepy. Their states of arousal are very are sporadic sometimes, depending on if they're on seizure medication, or if they have to be tube fed, or there's all kinds of issues when we're working with our kiddos who are home in that early intervention stage. And so knowing the time of day would be a big plus for you, and when you're trying to get the most out of the time that you're there to do evaluations. And I don't know the rules in Indiana or how that all works, but I know in Texas, like if I had to go to a parent's home in the evening because that's when the child was most aware, I would do that. I was allowed to do that, but I know that's different everywhere. So if that becomes the case, then that's something you have to try to work out with the family. Maybe you would have to do, they would have to video their child, and you would have to do your observations and your LMA based on that. So you can be a little more flexible for sure doing an LMA at the birth to 3 stage than you can be, I think, when you're at the school age stage. It's a little more formal at that point. However, when you do have kiddos, even at the school age stage, who are very involved, this procedure for doing an LMA would actually be appropriate for them as well. It's not demeaning for an older student. It's not obvious that, this would be something you would use on an infant or a toddler, and you're using this for a student who is, 15. That has happened before where, a child is 15 or 16, but they're functioning really, really low. So you don't want to use an assessment that is designed for, an infant or toddler, or for a child who is 4 or 5 years old, because that can be insulting, and it's demeaning. And so we have to be real careful about that. But this particular procedure for an LMA, it's based on observation and interview, and that's appropriate at any age. So that's another plus for this. Once we're getting to the bottom of it, and we'll be able to do some practice and then see how you can write up results from the parent interview and your observation of sensory preferences. So the natural observation, when we're looking at, we do observations of parents or caregivers, do observation, or any other team members who go into the home at early intervention, speech therapists, OT, PT. OTs and PTs are excellent to get information from, especially because, especially the OTs, because we can closely align what we're doing with the student with what the OT is doing. OTs obviously have different training, just like we have different training, but I think our goals can really do kind of coincide together and work really well together. So I'm not undoing anything that they're doing, which is really important when we're working in early intervention, for sure. It's important anytime, but for sure early intervention. And so, any of the caregivers for that particular, caregivers or service providers for that particular student can provide information about any behaviors that the child has either usual or unusual, especially any abnormal visual behaviors. Before CVI was as well known as it is now, we would have parents, mentioning to us that it looks like their child is looking through them and not at them. And so sometimes that would be confused for like autism, but it really was, it was a CVI issue. And so, those are the kinds of things that help us figure out what really is going on with the child's vision, and that it's not a behavioral condition, it's a visual condition. And it's not ocular, because a lot of times the kid's eyes look like they look typical, but the brain is not communicating with the eyes when we're talking CVI. So those types of things are really important for observations to be relayed to us, because sometimes then we can help. I'm sure you'll read stories or hear from TVIs who've been in the field forever, and that who will tell you, we worked with these kids and we didn't know that what was going on with why they couldn't see, because the concept of CVI was not very well known for a long time. And so observations really help us try to problem solve and figure out what's going on, so that we can implement a plan that's appropriate and that can work best for the individual student. So during these routines or these, natural observation times, mealtime, watching TV, getting dressed, watching them in play groups or any community outings, birthday parties, just going to the park, sliding, going on slides and swings, which right now I know is is kind of difficult because of COVID, but it all depends on the area you're in, and, you know, whether parks are open for the kids to go and play, or, you know, if you're allowed to go into people's homes. Because I know that that's a big issue right now too with COVID, and we're all trying to figure out, you know, some recommendations on how we're supposed to do this. APH is working on that right now. We're trying to get some recommendations out by September, because that's, you know, the meat of when most schools start. And so natural observation, a lot of it may have to occur via video, because a parent is taking video of their child during mealtime, or, you know, or during these natural observation times. Informal tools and procedures during their daily routines is the best time to really be assessing the student, looking or observing them when they're playing with their toys that are familiar to them. I know as a TVI myself, I have a big suitcase full of toys that I had in my car, or the back of my SUV, which was my mobile office, and I'm sure you all can totally identify with that. Suitcase full of different toys, and blinky toys, and vibrating toys, and, you know, squishy toys, very tactile type toys, which is awesome and great. However, you want to try and do the observation with the toys that they know, that they're familiar with. And that way you get a good sense of how they're using their vision. And then you can always introduce new toys or new items to them, and then make note of how they interact with the new items, which is also important, right? You know, observing them sharing a storybook, eating lunch, or interacting with their siblings or caregivers. And if you've ever done any observations or worked in the home, if there are siblings around, they want to be right in the middle of it, and they want to be tested, quote unquote, or assessed as well. And so, you know, that's fine. I let it all, you know, happen, because otherwise kids are going to be upset and crying, and it's going to totally mess up the, you know, the mojo in the room. So, but that is a good way too to see how they interact with their siblings. Informal tools could be books, familiar and motivating toys, eating utensils, you know, forks or sporks or spoons, their clothing, and of course, and pets. So all these are different tools that you can use that are in the home. So you don't have to lug in your big suitcase full of toys. Now, there are times, I know in my experience, where I've gone into a family's home, and there weren't a lot of toys. There weren't, you know, any books. You know, there were very scant furnishings. And so then at that point, you do have to bring in your toys, and that's fine. But if at all possible, making sure that you're observing them using the items that are familiar with them, you're going to get the better results. Environmental considerations when we're doing this, for not only for FVA, but for LMA: color, contrast, lighting, space, distance, and time. So you can see how these things kind of coincide with the LMA. For space and distance, you know, looking at their physical position, arrangement of environment, any presentation of activities and objects make sure that, you know, at the child's eye level, any visual landmarks within the environment. So that you have to take into consideration those types of things as well when you're looking at the LMA, how they learn. You know, space and distance, if it's far, depending on where the item or, you know, is placed, that's going to affect whether or not they're using their vision for learning. You know, and that's also part of the FVA. So they all kind of go hand in hand. Time, which is probably one of the hardest things I think that we have to deal with as teachers, is wait time. You know, and I'm sure you've probably gone through this exercise where they tell you, look at your watch for, you know, or your, well, I say watch like I'm not wearing a watch anymore, or your phone or whatever, that, and wait for 10 seconds. 10 seconds can seem like an eternity when you're waiting for, you know, it's a response from a student or from a child. So, you know, kids with multiple disabilities need that time to detect, to recognize that you are, you know, showing them something, and like to detect that there's anything there, recognize that, you know, what it is that they're looking at, and then, you know, acting on it. So if we want a student to, you know, act on a switch or a button, sorry, my cats live where I'm at, so sorry, just put her down so she doesn't just take up the whole camera. It just, when we're trying to teach children to use a switch, or, you know, whether it's with their hand or with their foot, sometimes it just takes that little time for them to really process the information. And when you're working with a kid with multiple disabilities or TBI, we have to do these particular actions in, you know, we have to do them in separate ways, and we have to be quiet after we present the item, and then give them time to do all that, which is hard for us to do. But in order for us to really get a sense of how they learn, we have to be able to implement that time, that wait time. So developmentally, or the DALMA, we're trying to, you know, drill down to what their sensory preferences are and what learning environments, and then what intervention materials and methods that we can use. You know, because visual impairments affect how they see the world, how they're going to learn. Okay, so it is used with the FBA to describe their sensory abilities, identifies their sensory preferences, allowing us to understand how to present sensory information to the child. Everything around us is sensory, whether it's touch, and I don't mean and it can be touch from a person, but it can be air, you know, a fan going, like all of that affects our sense of touch, and of course our sense of temperature, our comfort levels. You know, how do we present these information, these items or this information to the child in ways that they prefer to take in the information. Understand how to calm or alert the child, and identify adaptations and interventions and strategies to promote effective use of their senses. Again, with most of the kids we work with who have multiple disabilities, it definitely takes some time for us to really figure out how we can promote that effective use of their senses, because they have multiple disabilities. They can't use all of their senses all at one time. So which one is the one that they prefer the most? And then go from there to identify their secondary and tertiary sensory preferences. So if you notice, when we're using learning media assessment, sensory preferences is like interchangeable, because at this point we're figuring out what sensory preference they have to help them learn, versus using what type of materials they need access to or prefer access to in the school setting to help them learn. So it's a little bit of a mind shift and thinking outside the box when we're doing these LMAs for the babies. So the learning media assessment tools for this age group, Tanny Anthony, like I said, created these, and the first one is the Individual Sensory Learning Profile Interview, or ISLPI. And that is, it asks the caregivers questions about how a child uses, with VI, uses sensory information during activities and routines. And then the second part is the Observational Assessment of Sensory Preferences, or the OASP. Again, Tanny Anthony created it. She updated it in 2003, and that's the last update that I have so far for this particular tool. And the observational, the OASP, assists in direct observations of the child's sensory behaviors within the natural environments, okay? So when you do the interview, the description of how the child appears to access that sensory information, it was kind of teased out, you know, because we're looking at under specific circumstances and conditions. It helps us document how they respond to visual stimuli, if they respond at all, right? Because a kid with CBI may not respond at all, or a kid with multiple disabilities that's just having trouble integrating their sensory functions may not use their vision at all at one point, but at another point later on in their development, that might change. And so that's why it's important to do these LMAs so early on, to, like I said, build that case and really be able to document their progress, not only for us and for the benefit of how we provide services to the child, but also for progress monitoring purposes, because we have to report how our students progress, even in early intervention, and that information goes to eventually, makes its way through all the channels that it has to go through to the state, and that helps determine funding for us to be able to continue to provide these services. It also helps us figure out, like, if there's latency of their visual response, how long is that latency? How long does it take them to actually react to a visual stimulus? And any preferences for any types of auditory, vestibular, or kinesthetic stimuli. And then, of course, positioning preferences that support that overall sensory responsiveness. The other thing that this does, as far as, like I said, building the case for, maybe Braille later down the line, or some other type of, assistive or adaptive learning materials, but also because our children tend to have blindisms, and blindisms are very different from autism. And if we can document their behaviors and their preferences, right, their sensory preferences from early on, when they get to school, and it seems like it happened so often when I was a practitioner out in the schools, there was always a time where somebody would say, do you think that he or she can be autistic? I mean, they're always flicking their hands, or, always like rocking back and forth. And I'm like, well, they're 7 years old, that could be attributed to a blindism. And you can always go back and look at what they've done and how the interventions have been put into place for that student, because eventually, if those behaviors don't change and they become more serious, then we might be looking at autism. But I think being able to document the behaviors that this child has been displaying since you got them on your caseload, or since they were recognized and put into the system so that they were receiving services as early as possible, that helps a lot with teasing out whether or not there is an additional diagnosis. So I think that's also very important. I mean, the LMA starting at this early stage can help with so much down the line. I think it's something that we can't overlook. And so I was just so glad when I ran across this, and knowing that it had been available for so long, but I didn't learn about it in my program when I went through Texas Tech. And I love Texas Tech. I think they did a great job, but no, there is no specialized, and there should be a specialized, like, credential or specialized profession as an early interventionist teacher of the visually impaired. And so that's something that I know with the program that we had through the grant that I had here at Illinois State, when I was at Illinois State, that was kind of the goal, was to kind of show, like, we really need this type of professional to go out and work with our kids in the homes. But things move slowly. And I think the more we talk about this and show the availability and the importance, the more we might start getting more programs to really try to focus in on early intervention. If it's not for an entire program, for at least a whole class. Because there's enough information to take up an entire semester of early intervention for kids with visual impairments. It's just not something that's taken a high priority in a lot of our programs, because there's no room. There's so much stuff we have to teach. You get like a real cursory introduction to EI, and then you move on. So I'm glad that everyone's here to get a little more in-depth information. And then the observational assessment gathers that information about sensory behaviors, notes sensory preferences based on the child's responses or level of alertness, and calming activities. Compares sensory use in structured and unstructured situations. Notes the toy, the activity, and the motivational preferences. A lot of kids are motivated by food. We don't want to make that the primary motivation, but if that's what we need to have in order to motivate the child, to either you know, focus on what we are trying to show them or engage in the activity that the family has chosen to be their goal. Because remember, at this stage, at early intervention, where it's all about the family's goals and not so much our goals. And so looking at those motivational preferences are very important. Some kids are just motivated by knowing their mom is in the room, or their sisters in the room. So you just have to realize those things so that when you develop your IFSP, that is a part of that, the plan to reach the goal that the parents are wanting us to focus on with them. Okay. So I know some of you, I know Lisa sent out the handouts for our practices. So I'm gonna click on, oops. The first handout will be looking at, look at handout K, which is that individual sensory learning profile interview. So I'm gonna click on that. Okay, so this is what you have, or you know, access to, and so this is what the interview looks like. Okay, of course this is blank, so you can download it, and I believe you can. I think it's a Word document, and if it's not, I'll make it into a Word document for you. But I believe it's in. Let me see. Let me download it and see if it downloads as a Word document. Yep, perfect. Make it bigger so everybody can see it better. Oops. Okay. So you can see this came from this module, the Early Intervention Training Center for Infants and Toddlers with Visual Impairments. The training center for infants and toddlers doesn't exist anymore. I wish it did, but the center there at Vanderbilt still does exist, just not the EI center. So here's the individual sensory learning profile interview. So you can use this for you can, you know, to individualize these for any of the kiddos you have, either birth to, you know, to 3, or any of your kiddos who are significantly more involved, that it would be appropriate to use this particular type of assessment with them. Okay. So again, a lot of this information you would get from the caregiver, the early interventionist, their teacher or their therapists, the medical diagnoses, current medications for their purpose. So this is information we need for the FVA anyway, right? So this is also a big part. Now the sensory profile questions are asked here. Do they have a diagnosis as being blind or visually impaired? Has the child been diagnosed as legally blind? You know, what is the medical diagnosis? The glasses. Does the child visually respond to a human face? Does the child respond to other visual stimuli? And so like these types of questions, we're not going to get from a clinical eye exam. So we have to, that's why this is so good, because it's giving us that extra info. So the stimuli, what are the characteristics? Is it illuminated? Are they pastel colored? Are they shiny, light reflective, brightly colored? Are they high contrast or familiar stimuli? So you're getting that information as well. Any other characteristics or details about the visual stimuli? Immediate or delayed response. Is there any immediate or delayed response to visual stimulus? And then an area here to describe, which again, since it's a Word document, you can just, you know, keep going if you need more space, which you probably will need more space than just a little double spaced area there. The type of environment that that seems to best support visual responsiveness. So that's, you know, that I think is extremely important as well, not only for us to ask it, but to help the parents kind of focus in on the things that we're looking for and the things that they should be looking for, right? They're not teachers of the visually impaired. They're not trained to look for these things, right? They're parents. they're trained to look for other things that as parents, we all do. You know, is my child eating? Are they walking? Are they, you know, those, the big things. But these little things that deal with vision or how they use their vision are not something that parents are going to just automatically look for. So in a lot of ways, you know, we are coaching and training our parents, especially in EI. I mean, that's the whole model, is the coaching and collaboration. So this helps the parents start to recognize some of the characteristics or some of the behaviors, I should say, that they should be on the lookout for. And that also helps make our observations that much richer, because it gives us that extra information that we wouldn't get just by going in and observing the student for an hour, right? Like most of us do, because that's a lot of time, that's really all the time we have. But if you inform the parents that these are the things they need to look for, you're going to get much richer information from that when you're not there. Looking at you know, focal distance in inches or feet, illumination preference, familiar settings or items, whether, you know, if it's quiet or if it's low visual clutter. You know, especially kids with CVI, their vision doesn't function very well if it's really noisy all the time. And it's hard to not have a noisy home when you have multiple kids running around. But that's something that the parents can help you with when you're not there, to maybe create a quiet time in the house or create a quiet area of the house where they can really look and see how the child does in that type of environment. Oh, and then accompaniment of any other sensory stimuli, other environmental preferences, including positioning needs for visual attending. When I was working in early intervention, I always remember this little boy. Gosh, so I want to take them all home. But this little boy was so cute. He, because of his issues, because he was multiply impaired, he had to constantly be laying on his back. He had a trach, and so his whole life he was always on his back. He would only, you know, get to like be put in a stander for just a little bit because he would start to choke. And so his whole life was, so, you know, he was maybe 2 when we started going in to see him. He was laying on his back, and his whole life was just the ceiling fan, and he loved the ceiling fan. He just did. But when we were there, we spent some time there with him and his family. When they sat him up and he was able to like look around the environment or see something other than that ceiling fan going on, he was like a totally different child. I mean, he just looked aware of his surroundings, happy, you know, we had a smile on his face. Like, you know, you could tell that he preferred that position, and was able to take in so much from his surroundings before he started to choke. And then we had to lay him down, and they had to do all the things that they do to clear the trach and everything. But so, you know, designing an intervention program for him was going to be tricky because we were going to have to be doing it in little spurts with the family. But that's how it worked for that kiddo. And I mean, it was amazing the difference a positioning made for that little boy. But we understood why he couldn't be like that all the time, because, you know, he literally could die from choking. So, you know, that's one of the challenges that we have as early interventionists, working with kiddos like that, but also one of the blessings, because it's like you can really see how we can help make a difference in the life of that child and in that family. And then, you know, asking about items that show visual preference or response to. It goes through hearing, goes through touch, kinesthetic, vestibular, it'll go through all of these things. I mean, you can see olfactory and taste, because we know birth to 3, everything goes in the mouth. And so eventually that stops. But, you know, if that's the way the child learns and, you know, and gets access to their environment, how are they using that? What do we need to do to, you know, not discourage it, but eventually wean them off of using that particular sense to learn, because that can become dangerous, especially right now with COVID going around. We don't want kids just putting things in their mouth. And so then here we would summarize their sensory preferences and recommendations for motivating objects. So you would put your summary based on the interview that you've done with the family, and your observations. you would put your summary for visual, hearing, touch, movement, smell, taste, and any other recommendations. And I don't want to go through this right now. I want us to get to the practice exercise, but there's an example here of how a case study that was done for this training module. It goes along with this and how the results were written up. So I'm just going to scroll down here. They went through and did the questions, and then you can see they just put in their summaries, and their summaries are not super extensive, but it's enough to give us an idea of what the preference the child has, which is a lot more than what we get by just doing the FVA. Okay. All right, so there's that. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. And then the handout L, which is the observational assessment of sensory preferences, which is the one we're going to use right now. We're going to watch a video, and you will use, as we're watching the video, you can, during watching that observation, you can make note of whether it's the child is showing visual, tactual, auditory, movement, or smell as a sense that they're using to access their environment. Now, this is not obviously the perfect situation for us right now to do it, but this is an example of how you can use this observation form. Okay, and it has, you can see observation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, and that could be one particular observation, but observation 1 could be watching him or her interact with the ball. Observation 2, watching him or her walk from the living room to the kitchen and how that looked. So it doesn't necessarily have to be completely separate observations. It could be events within the observation. Okay. Go back so that I can get to the right video. Okay, so we're going to do the sensory preference data collection activity. So I'm clicking on that. And we are going to look at an observation of Ethan. Okay, and we're going to review. We've already kind of gone through the developmentally appropriate learning media assessment process. So we've done that, and there's a handout here that kind of goes through it again. And we're going to look at the handout L, which features Ethan and what he, you know, and in a gym setting, I believe. It's a little dated, so just understand, because this is the last thing we have of any kind of early intervention training. So that's something that APH is looking at. We're gonna update all this stuff. So, you know, we're moving and shaking over there. But for now, this is useful information, even though it's dated. And so then we're gonna look at, while we're watching Ethan, he is 19 months old. He has ROP and cataracts, okay? After we view the clip, we can talk about, you know, what the observations are that you have, what sensory preferences that you observed as he played with musical instruments and read stories with his mom and was walking, okay? So those are the things that you're gonna see. He walked across the gymnasium. So those are the things you're gonna see in the video. So we wanna just think about that, and looking at handout L, which has the, you know, the behaviors, and then the V, the T, the M, and the S and the A. They're not in that right order, but, and you can make those notes, you can circle them, or, you know, mark them out however you want to. If you're using your computer, you can highlight the letters that you're seeing that indicate what sense he was using during the musical instruments, during when he was having stories read to him with his mother, and when he walked across the gym. So those are like 3 observations that you can get just on that one form. Okay, so let me click on the video. Oh, I think I already have it up. Yeah, I do. And I will mute myself and turn off my camera so that we can all focus on the video, okay?
Ethan, a 19-month-old boy with retinopathy of prematurity and an aphakic right eye, sits on a blue mat in a gymnasium. He is surrounded by a variety of musical instruments such as drumsticks, bells, and maracas. Ethan holds a red rhythm stick in each hand and a talking drum is in front of him. A TVI who is not visible sits in front of the talking drum and taps a tone block on the drum. Ethan drops each stick. Ethan's mother is sitting slightly behind him on his right side. She picks up a ring of musical bells and taps them on the talking drum. Ethan touches the bells briefly and then reaches for and grasps a red rhythm stick. He looks at it and manipulates it briefly and then drops it and crawls over to the talking drum to reach a bongo drum that the TVI is tapping. He grabs the bongo and returns to sitting. He examines the bongo visually and tactually and takes it to his mouth to mouth it. While Ethan explores the bongo, the TVI taps a musical rhythm on the talking drum using a stick. Ethan's mother picks up a red stick and places it inside the hollow end of the bongo. The toddler maintains brief fixation while she models stirring. His mother then turns the bongo over and taps.
I forgot to mention, this is audio described, so the audio description is going to come first, and then you're going to be able to see what he's doing. So just so you know that it's not frozen.
On it using the red stick. Ethan appears uninterested as he looks past the bongo and blue maraca she holds. After appearing to visually fixate on something to his right, Ethan moves forward and picks up two red rhythm sticks. Holding one stick in each hand, he taps the two sticks together. He purposefully drops the stick in his right hand and picks up a third stick in front of him that he spotted visually. He visually inspects the stick in his right hand and then jerkily shifts his gaze to the stick in his left hand. Reaching from behind Ethan, his mother uses hand-over-hand guidance as she models how to rub the sticks together. Ethan appears to focus visually on her hands and the sticks, and he smiles and appears to enjoy this interaction. Ethan then drops both sticks and picks up another red stick, waves it, and examines it closely using vision and touch. His mother picks another stick up and taps it on the bongo. Ethan reaches for and grasps the stick in his right hand and mimics the movement by waving the stick in the air. His mother gently guides his arm down to tap on the bongo. While looking away, the toddler makes several tapping attempts but misses tapping the bongo most of the time. His mother uses hand over hand occasionally to help Ethan tap the drum with his stick. He does not appear interested, though. He taps his sticks together while looking at them intently. Then he appears to visually inspect the stick in his right hand before taking it to his mouth to mouth it. He turns right toward his mother, and his bare foot and leg touch the musical bells. He seems to visually attend to the bells while turning toward his mother, but then focuses on the black microphone near the bells. He reaches for it with his left hand while still holding the other stick in his right hand. He does not appear interested in the musical bells and maracas that his mother uses to try to distract him from the microphone. She picks up red rhythm sticks and taps them briefly while Ethan waves his hands at them. The TVI loudly taps on the talking drum with the tone blocks. Ethan turns and looks toward her.
Stick in the bongo. What's over here? The maracas?
Are you laughing now?
Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. Let's not sit on your knees. Mr. Lee's sitting here today. No, you just the right stick. Tap, tap.
Ethan is sitting on a blue mat with books scattered around him.
Want to read the Bumpy Roll? Bumpy Rolls Away?
The adult reaches from behind the toddler and opens the book.
Bumpy was a little ball with lots of bumps on him.
Ethan leans toward the book and touches the picture while maintaining close visual fixation.
Can you feel the bumps? Can you feel the bumps? Turn the page. See what happens to them.
Ethan's mother reaches over the toddler and tries to turn the page, but he moves close to the book and maintains fixation at approximately 2 inches.
Bumpy's a little ball with lots of bumps. Yeah. He's got lots of bumps. Do you see those bumps? Do you see those bumps and feel those bumps?
Ethan moves away from the book and sits up. His mother turns the page.
One day, Bumpy and his friend were playing a game.
Ethan once again moves closely to view the picture. He appears to fixate on a 1-inch red ball on the center of the page.
They were outside. Bumpy was happy. It was sunny and he could feel the warm grass under him. That's Bumpy. That's Bumpy. He's a ball. Then Bumpy's friends threw him too hard and he rolled down a long hill. Can you feel the hill? He rolled down a long hill.
Ethan's mother takes his hand and guides it to touch the tactile cue on the page.
How will I ever get home to my friend again, he moaned. I missed my own steps. You going to turn the page?
After the page is turned, Ethan appears to visually scan the page. He then lifts the book off the floor and sees another book underneath. He fixates on this other book until his mother places the Bumpy book back on the floor to continue reading.
Now it's behind you.
Looking at graphing? My own hill? Where's Bumpy?
Ethan moves toward his left and spots a third small book on the floor. He picks the small book up and brings it to within 4 inches of his eyes to inspect it as he turns it over.
He likes Spot. He likes Spot. Spot. Yes, sir.
Ethan is now seen pushing a sound-making push toy around the room. He moves quickly across the floor until he reaches a group with 2 adults and a baby where he slows down slightly and appears to visually focus on a small green turtle behind one of the adults.
There you go, bud.
Walk the other way. Does she have a name?
Ethan stops, looks up, and appears to fixate on the videographer who had moved around in front of him. His mother walks over, bends down to his level, and directs his attention to the small green toy turtle.
I called her this morning and she said, oh, we're coming. And then
Okay. It was a very busy video, a lot going on, lots of background noise going on as well. But I think you were able to get a really good idea of, you know, looking at Ethan and trying to really figure out what his sensory preferences were in those three different behavioral scenarios, right? I'm gonna minimize this and go back to, okay. So when we look at our handout L, so looking at Ethan for that first behavioral observation of when Ethan was playing with the instruments and making the music, I thought myself he was very visually guided. He seemed to not have any issues, you know, focusing to where the toys were, you know, hitting the instrument, bringing the instrument to his eye to look at. And so for me, it would be for that first behavioral observation, I would definitely mark it as a visual primary, and then the auditory would be secondary. And in my opinion, that's the other thing about an observation, and this is kind of an informal thing. You might get people who say, well, I think it's auditory first and then visual, and that's fine. It's because it's informal, it's all situational. You know, we try our best to come to an agreement on what we're seeing and how we're making note of that. And so asking the parent as well what they think about, if they're watching the video of their child, to how they feel about whether or not, you know, he's using his vision more versus his auditory, or to support the vision. So, but for me, for that first section, I would definitely say vision is his first preference, and then auditory, and tactual movement, of course, because he's moving the sticks and playing, and then tactual. For the book part, the book behavioral observation, definitely visual. I mean, going down and looking at it. Mom would show him another book, he, you know, holding it, bringing it up to his face. So that was complete for me. His primary sensory channel for learning was visual. And that confuses people sometimes, because they're visually impaired. How can they be, you know, have a visual preference for learning? Well, because that's how he's using his vision. That just tends to be where this child prefers to take in information. And then for the push toy, it obviously would be motion, but it was still visual, in the sense like he was going across the room. And what really solidified my opinion that his vision seems to be his primary preferred learning sense was when the videographer was in his way and got there. He looked up at the videographer like, what are you doing? I'm trying to play with my toy here, right? And then when mom said, oh, look at the turtle down, you know, at whenever we're talking to our kids, even if we know that they're probably not going to understand right away, we always need to make sure that we're using orientation language, like, oh, look at the and descriptive language. Look at the green turtle on the, you know, down on the floor on the left side of your toy. It's just a habit that we all need to get into. Even though they're babies, we don't want to say, oh, look at that toy. Well, what does that mean? Right? We need to be real descriptive about those things when we're working with a child with a visual impairment. But either way, when she pointed out that there was a turtle on the floor, immediately he looked at it, went down, tried to grab it. So for me, if I was doing this LMA and reporting it, I would definitely say vision is his primary preferred sense, and then follow that up with auditory, movement, and tactual. And then, you know, if smell was involved, there was no smell involved here, so I wouldn't put that. The thing about these, this particular form, it doesn't allow you to put, like, you know, circle V and then like as a 1 or T as a 2. So I would circle it myself and put, you know, a P for primary or a 1 for first. And then, you know, if I was going to do auditory second, I would just put circle A with a 2. So to delineate which one seems to be the primary, secondary, and tertiary channels for him, for this particular example. So I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. Let me go back to the PowerPoint and just show you, there is an example report. Well, first, before I mention that, this developmentally appropriate learning media assessment for Jasmine, this one actually includes information from the interview. So like that video, you would see the parents being interviewed and you'd be able to get some of that information and then observe her and fill out the observation form. And so that gives you a little more practice using the forms, but then I also included an example report of how the FVA and the LMA were put together in one report. And oops, let me go back up to that. And then we'll open it up for questions. Oh, I was like, don't tell me it's not going to download. Let's see. Move it over here. It's too big. What's going on here? Sorry about that. I'm sharing, I'm extending screens, and so it's, my computer is not appreciating that, I guess. Okay. There we go, finally. Look, like what is going on here? Okay, so you can see this report is based on the case study that's within the modules. And so all the typical FBA information is all here. And I'm going through it fast, I apologize. And then you see here, they just included at the end of the FVA, before all the recommendations and stuff, the results of the DALMA. And they included the visual information from their observations, the hearing, the tactual the touch or movement, the smell and the taste. Gave the summaries and then the recommendations and adaptations all put in here. Strategies as well. And so that's an example of how this information was integrated into one report. Last thing I want to, I won't go through all the rest of the slides, but they're all here. I want to show you the resources really quickly. So you've got, if you click on that link for TSBVI, and you want to click on the link, you don't want to do a search. Like on their TSBVI webpage, it's not very user friendly right now. I know they're working on it, so it's hard to find this information, and that's not on purpose. It's just TSBVI has thousands of pages of information, so I'm sure it's hard to pull it all together. But that link will get you to all of the sessions for this particular project that was done. That's not available anymore for purchase, which is okay because you got it for free here. So if you just scroll down, you can see session 1. It starts with the foundations, and where I'm going to scroll down really quickly here to, we were in session 4, which was the assessment session. The videos are also included here. Okay, so session 4 started with developing a brochure, but developing questions for the FVA, the activity, formal assessment tools, and then one of the activities that we did, observation, well, this one was observation of functional vision during daily routine. So, but it keeps going on to get to the LMA part and talked about functional vision checklists and things like that. So I wanted to make sure that you had the link that takes you directly to these materials. And then the last resource that I'd like to show you, if you don't have this or don't know about it yet, a Braille readiness grid. I think it's important for us to have and use as early as possible for our kiddos, again, to try to build that case for when Braille may be recommended for the child. Okay, and this document will just help you along with that. So I wanted to make sure you had access to that if you hadn't seen it before or used it. Okay. and my contact info is there.
Okay, we do have one question that popped up about is it okay to use these for a 3-year-old entering preschool with no previous home services?
Yes, I would say so, especially if they haven't had any home services, which is unfortunate to not have, but it happens, right? I mean, we've had kids show up for the first time and, when they're 5 or 6 and they were not on anybody's radar. And so, even at that point, I would do this because we really don't know where they are as far as what they're using as their sensory channels that they prefer. For an older child, I would definitely do this, plus, obviously more in-depth tools that would be more appropriate for a 5 or 6-year-old. But for a 3-year-old, this is definitely appropriate, for sure, no doubt.
Okay, so we have another question. Do you make recommendations for Braille or audio at this young an age?
Well, Braille is not necessarily you're going to be teaching Braille at this young age, but you're going to be looking at like their tactual preferences, tactual discrimination, and that form that I brought up. Let me see, where did it go? The Braille readiness grid. I hope you can still see it. I'm still sharing my screen, so hopefully you can still see it. When you look at the grid, like looking at tactile, the tactile sense, tolerates being touched, enjoys being touched, locates object by touch. So you can start making, notes of whether or not they're doing these things. And for the tactile sense, and then looking at fine motor, do they hold the object in each hand, right? Not just one preference for one hand over the other, because reading Braille for the most part is a two-handed skill. I know that there are some kids that only use one hand over the other, and there are special instructional strategies for that. But for the most part, it's a two-handed skill. So you want to make note of that. Pincer grasp, that's important, right? Because that's that fine motor skill that kids are going to need to be able to distinguish the dots of Braille and the Braille cells. So when they're little like that, you may not necessarily be teaching Braille itself, but you're teaching those skills that are preparing them to learn Braille when it's developmentally appropriate. Braille is a hard thing to learn. It's because it's so abstract in a lot of ways, and so we want to get them ready to do that. So that's why this Braille readiness grid, I think, is a really good way to help guide us as to when they're ready. And we're able to make that case that yes, they're ready, because look, he or she can do all of these things. So it's just a natural progression then over to Braille.
Okay, she's followed up. I'm not sure if you've answered it or not.
Yeah,
so
I
the
see
follow-up, you see it?
Yeah, what about kiddos who are primarily visual but have progressive visual condition? Yes, you need to, if you know that someday they're gonna go blind, I recommend that, yes, you start teaching those tactile skills, and that way they can then keep progressing to learning Braille and other methods of obtaining access to their education. And like, for instance, a kid who might have RP, which is hard to diagnose at 3, birth to 3. But I was just on the phone with the Russell, God, I can't remember Russell's last name, but anyway, he's like one of the directors of accessibility for Walmart. We've been doing these interviews with these individuals, and he has RP. And he said in his interview, we were interviewing him, in his interview, he said he wished that he had learned Braille before he lost his vision completely. Because he didn't lose his vision completely until he thought he wasn't going to lose it until he was in his 30s. He lost it right before he started college. And so you talk about making that transition from high school to college, and now you're having to learn Braille too. So that right there and is a case for why we need to have dual media. That's my other area, dual language, dual media learners, and why we need to be training our kids who have that progressional, the vision loss that's progressive, to prepare them for when they do lose their vision, because once they do lose their vision, they're dealing with psychosocial issues that get in the way of them, you know, learning a new skill to help them move forward. So yes, I would start, if you know that they're going to lose their vision, I would start early with these tactual training for sure. Yep.
Okay, Carla wants to know where we find that grid.
So if you go to that website, you should be able to get it, because it's the Center for the Visually Impaired there. So when you go to this website, then I just typed in Braille Readiness Grid. And if that doesn't, well, I was going to say, and of course that's probably not going to work, then you can always Google it. You can find that. And there it is. So you can Google it, Braille Readiness Grid, and it'll get you to the first link that shows up. TSBVI has a copy too, and so it doesn't matter as long as you get it. So there's that there.
All right, then, on that note, I have put the link to the evaluation in the chat box. You'll also get an email probably Monday with that extra handout, the Braille grid, and the link again to remind you to do the eval. And thank you, Alaya, for being with us.
Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.